The sky over northern
Not alone
Montana
here.
pressed down like cold steel. Snow clung to the trees in thick patches, melting just enough to turn the back roads into a slurry of mud and ice. Ethan Cole gripped the wheel of his rust-bitten pickup, knuckles white, jaw set, eyes scanning the gravel lane as it narrowed into forest. The heater coughed but gave no warmth. In the passenger seat, Bravo sat alert, sable coat dense, ears twitching, golden eyes flicking from the window to his human. Bravo hadn't made a sound in 20 minutes. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than words. Ethan was driving toward something desperate. Ethan didn't remember the last warm meal he had. Didn't remember the last time he slept somewhere that didn't smell like engine grease or stale coffee. But he remembered every detail of the tax auction earlier that morning. The folding chairs, the old men in flannel with property maps folded under their arms, the dismissive glances, and the listing at the bottom of the sheet. Lot 27. Abandoned cabin. 2 acres. Structure unsafe. Back taxes. $50. Exactly what he had left. The woman running the auction didn't look twice at him when he raised his hand, didn't flinch when he handed her the crumpled bills. She just nodded, handed over a receipt, and moved on. Ethan didn't blame her. He didn't look like anyone's idea of a property owner. His coat was an old M65 field jacket from his deployment days, its pockets sagging with tools and stubborn memories. His boots were scuffed, laces mismatched. He hadn't shaved in a week. But Bravo? Bravo looked like he belonged anywhere. Regal, intact, a dog that walked like he carried orders in his blood. The truck jolted hard as they hit a rut, yanking Ethan back to the present. He squinted through the windshield. There it was. The cabin stood like a forgotten memory, half swallowed by the trees. Roof bowed in the center. Porch sagging. Vines like skeletal fingers crawling up the beams. One shutter hung sideways, flapping slowly in the wind like a broken signal. Bravo sat upright, tail stiff, nose flaring towards the structure. Not fear, not curiosity. Focus. Ethan killed the engine and stepped out into the biting cold. Bravo followed, hitting the ground with a soldier's precision. Snow crunched under paw and boot alike as they approached the porch. A board cracked beneath Ethan's weight, and he paused. "Well, buddy," he muttered. "This is either rock bottom or the start of something better." Bravo gave a short, low whuff, a sound that always meant, "I'm with you, whatever comes next." The front door was swollen shut, so Ethan circled around the side. A back window, cracked but unlocked, gave just enough to slide through. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with mildew. Dust swirled in the slivers of light cutting through the warped slats. Rodent droppings scattered the floor. Something dead in the corner reeked of years gone by, but the bones of the place were there, thick timbers, stone hearth, a table still standing. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was shelter. Bravo padded in behind him, tail low, head swiveling. He sniffed near the baseboard, then froze. His ears shot forward. He growled, low, quiet, not hostile. Focused. "What is it?" Ethan asked, stepping toward him. Bravo didn't move. Instead, he lifted one massive paw and scratched once at the floor near the hearth. Then again. The sound was deliberate, measured. Ethan crouched down and ran his hand over the wood. There was a seam, a narrow edge barely visible beneath the dust. He grabbed a crowbar from his bag and wedged it in. With a grunt, he pried. The floor groaned once and gave way. Bravo backed up as the board came loose. Beneath it, darkness, and something metallic. Ethan's breath hitched. He reached down, fingers brushing cold steel. Then he gripped it fully and pulled. Whatever it was, it had weight. He had to brace his feet and use both arms. Slowly, a rusted box emerged, about 2 feet wide, sealed with a corroded latch and caked in grime. No markings, no handle. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. "Bravo, what did you just find?" The dog growled again, not at the box, at the window. Ethan turned. A beam of light sliced through the glass. Headlights. Someone was out there. Bravo moved fast, placing himself between Ethan and the light, his tail raised, his body rigid. Ethan stayed low, heart pounding. He reached for the crowbar again, but didn't move towards the door. He waited. The lights didn't move, didn't shut off, just hovered at the tree line. Then, darkness. The lights snapped off. The forest returned to shadow. Bravo didn't relax. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's back. The fur was bristling like static. Bravo didn't break his stare at the window. Whoever had been out there, if it was someone, they weren't gone. Not really. Ethan looked back down at the rusted box. The weight of it in his hands. The deliberate way it had been hidden. The fact that Bravo had found it. This cabin was supposed to be junk. $50 of desperation and blind hope. But now, something was wrong here. Or maybe, just maybe, something was finally right. He leaned closer to the box, brushing away years of dirt. "You've been guarding this all this time, haven't you, Bravo?" he said, voice barely above a whisper. Bravo didn't answer. He didn't need to. He just sat down next to the box, facing the window, watching. Still, ready. By midday, the wind had shifted. The sharp Montana cold dug deeper into Ethan's jacket, biting through the seams, reminding him this place wasn't going to make anything easy. The road to the cabin had disappeared behind them, swallowed by trees and snow, and now there was nothing but quiet. Thick, bone-deep quiet. Bravo stepped ahead, paws crunching through layers of frozen brush. His body moved like a tracker, nose to the ground, ears flicking at every creak of the trees or snap of distant branches. There was purpose in the way he walked, as if he already knew this place, and Ethan was just catching up. Ethan followed, hauling supplies from the truck to the porch, or what was left of it. The boards bowed under his weight. One side of the porch had collapsed entirely, and the support beam leaned out like a broken limb. Vines gripped the walls like skeletal fingers, bark and moss half swallowing what remained of the logs. Inside was worse. The front room sagged, the ceiling had collapsed in one corner, leaving a mess of rotted wood and insulation that smelled like wet ashes and dead mice. A couch older than sin sat beneath a broken window, its fabric torn open, stuffing spilled like entrails. An overturned wood stove lay in the middle of the floor, half buried in plaster dust. Ethan dropped his duffel by the doorway and let out a slow breath. This wasn't a cabin. It was a crypt. But it was his. Bravo circled the room, silent, nose working overtime. He didn't act nervous. Not exactly. But something had him on edge. His movements were too precise, too slow. "You smell something?" Ethan asked, voice hoarse from disuse. Bravo didn't answer, but his tail stiffened. He padded into the next room, claws clicking against warped floorboards. Ethan stepped into what had once been the kitchen. Most of the cabinets had collapsed in on themselves. A rusted sink hung from the counter like a broken jaw. The window over it was clouded with grime, and through it Ethan saw only the woods, thick, old trees that pressed close like watchers. It was the kind of place people disappeared into and stayed gone. That night, Ethan lit a small fire in the surviving part of the hearth, using what little dry wood he could find. The warmth barely touched the room, but it was enough to coax the cold from his hands. He unrolled his sleeping pad on the least warped section of floor and leaned back against the wall. Bravo curled at his side. For the first time in months, he felt something close to stillness. Not peace? Not yet. But the war inside him, The static from loss and failure went quiet for a minute. Bravo stirred. Ethan opened one eye. The dog had lifted his head, ears perked. He rose slowly, body tense but quiet. Then he walked to the corner of the room near the fireplace and sniffed, pawing gently at the floor. Ethan sat up. "Again?" he murmured. Bravo kept digging. Light scratches at first, more insistent the longer Ethan waited. He got to his knees and crawled over. The boards here didn't look different, but something had Bravo's full attention. Ethan ran his hand along the wood until he felt it. An edge, almost imperceptible under his fingers. He retrieved the crowbar. One board came loose with a groan. Then another. Dust billowed into the firelight. Bravo backed up just slightly, watching closely, every muscle alert. Beneath the floorboards, something glinted. Ethan brushed away layers of dirt. His hand hit. Metal. Cold. Ridged. A box, long and rectangular. He worked it loose with both hands, dragging it upward with a grunt. The thing was heavier than it looked. The surface was coated in grime and rust. No markings, no handle, just a sealed latch corroded with age. He set it on the floor between them, breath fogging in the air. "You dragged me into this ghost house for this?" he said. Bravo didn't move, just sat beside the box, eyes locked on Ethan, tail still. Ethan leaned in, pressing his palm to the lid. It was warm. He pulled back. That didn't make sense. The room was barely above freezing. Everything else he'd touched in this cabin felt like ice. But the box, this box, felt like it had been waiting for someone. He didn't sleep much after that. He lay on the floor, Bravo beside him, both watching the box like it might blink. 1,000 thoughts came, but none stayed. All he could think about was Sarah, her voice the last time they spoke. "Don't stop moving, Ethan. Just get to the next mile, that's all." Then the one after he hadn't made it very far. But tonight, something felt different. Somewhere around 3 a.m., a sound outside snapped him upright. Bravo was already up, head turned toward the window, low growl in his throat. Headlights. Just past the trees, 2 beams of light pierced the night. Not moving, just watching. Bravo stepped forward, one paw at a time, standing between Ethan and the window. Ethan grabbed the crowbar again. He waited, and the lights vanished. No engine, no tires on gravel, just gone. Ethan didn't sleep again. By dawn, the frost on the inside of the windows looked like spider webs. The fire had gone out, and his breath hung in the air. Bravo remained by the box, eyes heavy but still alert. Ethan rubbed his face and muttered, "What the hell did we just step into?" Outside, the snow had started again. A slow drift of silence, falling over a cabin that hadn't seen visitors in years. But now it had a Marine, and a dog who didn't flinch. Ethan looked at Bravo. "You knew, didn't you? This place isn't just rot and timber. It's something else." Bravo's ears twitched. He padded to the box and sat, waiting, watching, like a soldier guarding something sacred. Ethan stood, knees cracking, and placed his hand back on the metal lid. He didn't know what was inside, but he knew one thing for certain. They weren't alone anymore, and whatever this box held, it was only the beginning. Ethan waited until daylight. Not because he wasn't curious, hell, he hadn't slept, but because whatever was in that box didn't deserve to be opened with numb hands and half a flashlight. If someone had been watching them last night, whatever was inside was worth more than $50 and a forgotten deed, maybe worth more than even he could imagine. Bravo sat beside the box like a sentinel, eyes heavy but never drifting far. When Ethan moved, the dog shifted too, never once letting his gaze stray from that rusted metal rectangle. Ethan crouched beside it and ran his fingers across the lid. Cold again now. The warmth from last night was gone, like it had just been a trick of the mind. Or a warning. He fetched his toolbox from the truck and returned with a flathead screwdriver, a headlamp, and his last cup of instant coffee, still steaming in an old enamel mug. He set the tools beside the box, looked at Bravo. "Moment of truth," he said. Bravo didn't blink. Ethan wedged the screwdriver beneath the latch, braced his knee, and pried. Rust snapped. The latch gave way with a screech, flakes of iron curling off like old bark. He paused, hand resting on the lid. Then he opened it. Inside, everything was wrapped in oiled cloth and thick wax paper, layers upon layers. A faint, pungent scent rose, metal, grease, and thyme. The kind of smell that clung to old machine shops and forgotten bunkers. Ethan peeled back the cloth with slow hands. The first item was a notebook, leather-bound, its edges cracked and corners curled. The initials R.B. were barely visible on the front. He opened it. The handwriting was clean, tight, deliberate. Block letters mixed with slanted cursive. Lines filled every page. Notes, calculations, observations in black fountain pen ink. Dated entries ran down the left-hand side. March 3rd, 1962. April 17th, 1964. August 9th, 1968. He flipped further. July 22nd, 1974. Then the pages stopped. A pause. The next entry wasn't for 5 years. December 19th, 1979. Ethan blinked. He flipped back. That couldn't be right. Because according to a faded newspaper article he barely remembered from years back, the man whose initials were on this journal, Dr. Russell Blake, had been declared dead in 1975. Vanished from a Department of Energy site in Nevada. Rumors had swirled about espionage, a nervous breakdown, even desert cults. Nothing was ever confirmed. He just disappeared. Bravo shifted beside him, as if picking up on the sharp edge in Ethan's breath. Ethan thumbed through the entries again. The last one was short. Just a few lines. They know. It's no longer safe to continue in Nevada. I've relocated the core designs here. This cabin. Let them look in the desert. Ethan sat back on his heels, pulse ticking in his throat. This was real. Not some crank's fantasy, not some survivalist manifesto. The diagrams tucked into the notebook were detailed and exact. Pressure levels, output ratios, magnetic field behavior. He looked back into the box and pulled out the next bundle. More notebooks, bound in cheap black covers, pages filled with formulas and sketches. Tucked between them were folded sheets, blueprints, hand-drawn but crisp. Their lines were so precise it looked like machine drafting. Symbols dotted the margins. Strange ones. Triangles overlapping with circles. Greek letters mixed with what looked like personal shorthand. And then he saw it. A drawing of a cylindrical device, roughly the size of a large thermos, surrounded by spiraling copper coils. It wasn't labeled bomb, engine, or reactor. It was titled Field-Driven Resonance Generator Mark I. Ethan didn't understand most of the math, but the structure looked unlike any generator he'd ever worked on. No fuel intake, no combustion chamber, no fan blades, just tight rings around a central coil and what appeared to be a stabilizing field. Clean energy, Ethan murmured. From this? He reached back into the box and unwrapped the last bundle. There it was, the prototype. It was heavier than he expected. About a foot long, no wider than a soda can, and made of brushed steel with no visible seams. Engraved symbols ran along its sides, small and tight, like the etchings on old military optics. It felt dense, intact, alive. Bravo inched closer, nose twitching. "You smell that?" Ethan whispered. Bravo let out a quiet whine, not of fear, but something else. Respect, maybe. Recognition. The same sound he made when Ethan pulled out Sarah's old photos. Something remembered. Ethan set the device down gently and rubbed his palms on his jeans. Who the hell was Russell Blake? He dug back into the documents, flipping through notes and annotations. Mentions of the Department of Energy, of projects scrapped, of applications rejected due to militarization concerns. One line was underlined 3 times. They'll weaponize it if they get it. And another, written in red ink. Find someone who will bury it or protect it. Someone not for sale. Ethan leaned back against the wall, staring at the box, the journals, the device. He didn't know what scared him more, that Blake had built something powerful, or that someone might still be looking for it. The sunlight outside had shifted. A colder breeze snuck through the cracks in the wall. Bravo stood and walked to the window, posture stiff. He let out one low growl. Ethan rose slowly and joined him. There were no headlights this time. No sound. Just trees. Still. Watching. Bravo didn't move. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's shoulder. It was tense beneath his fingers. "We're not alone out here, are we?" he said quietly. Bravo didn't answer. Just pressed forward, protective, present. The box. The generator. The name Blake. The warning. $50 had bought Ethan a falling-apart cabin in the woods, and a secret that might be worth $5 million, or maybe his life. The sky above the cabin was that pale, washed-out blue that only shows up after a night below freezing. Frost clung to the grass like shards of glass, and the air smelled like cold pine and old stone. Ethan crouched on the front porch, sipping weak instant coffee from a tin cup, eyes drifting to the open box of journals beside him. Bravo lay just off the steps, stretched out but not relaxed, head up, ears angled. The dog hadn't stopped scanning the tree line since sunrise. Whatever instinct burned inside that shepherd was still on edge. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck and flipped open the hand-drawn map he'd found inside Blake's journals. The terrain sketch was remarkably accurate. Contours of the valley, tree lines, the stream behind the cabin. But it was the marks that stood out now. A series of shapes, circles, triangles, squares, each one drawn with intention, not random scribbles. A triangle marked the clearing where the cabin sat. A small square was etched beside the creek, and in the southeast corner of the page, a strange spiral next to the notation. Vault 2, secondary core, under 1.8 meters concrete. Under concrete. Ethan muttered. Of course. Bravo looked up. Ethan tilted the map toward him and chuckled under his breath. You see this, bud? Looks like we've got more treasure to dig up. Bravo stood immediately, tail stiff, as if he'd understood the assignment. By noon, Ethan had gathered his shovel, gloves, and a pry bar. He packed the map into a plastic sleeve and tucked it into his coat. Bravo trotted ahead, cutting through underbrush with soldier-like precision, stopping only to wait for Ethan to catch up. They followed the slope behind the cabin down to the creek. It was narrow but fast-moving, water rushing over smooth stones like a whisper. Bravo paused near the bend and sniffed the ground hard, then started pawing at a clump of moss near the base of an old pine. Ethan caught up, panting. "This it?" Bravo barked once, sharp and certain. Then he stepped back. Ethan knelt and cleared away the moss and leaves. His shovel hit something almost immediately. Not rock. Flat. Concrete. His pulse quickened. He dug faster, clearing the dirt around the edge. A small rectangle revealed itself, about 3 feet wide, its surface weathered but intact. At the center was a metal ring, rusted but solid. Faintly, just under the grime, was the same triple-line symbol drawn on the map. Ethan sat back on his heels, staring. "Okay," he whispered. "You weren't kidding, Blake." He gripped the ring and pulled. Nothing. He jammed the pry bar into the edge and leaned on it. With a creaking groan, the vault door gave way. Beneath it lay a dark cavity lined with steel. Inside, a cylinder, larger than the prototype in the cabin, about 2 feet long, capped on each end with brass plates engraved with more symbols. Ethan's breath caught. He reached in and lifted it. It was cold and heavier than expected. Bravo let out a low growl. Ethan froze. Not at the device. At the woods. Bravo was locked in place, ears forward, body coiled. "Someone out there?" Ethan whispered. Bravo gave a single bark, loud and sharp. Ethan spun, eyes searching the trees. Nothing. No movement, no sound, just forest. But Bravo was still locked in, still growling. Ethan shoved the cylinder into his pack, sealed the vault again, and slung the bag over his shoulder. "Time to go," he said. They climbed back uphill faster than they came down. By the time the cabin came into view, the sky had dimmed. Long shadows stretched across the clearing like reaching hands. Inside, Ethan shoved a dresser in front of the door. He set the new device on the table beside Blake's journals and turned on his lantern. Bravo paced. Not nervous. Alert, ready. Ethan tried to study the new cylinder, but his mind kept drifting back to the woods. That feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. By midnight, the fire had burned low. Ethan dozed in his jacket, shotgun across his lap. Then Bravo barked. Not a warning bark, an alarm. Ethan shot upright. Bravo was at the window, tail raised, ears forward. He growled again. Outside, near the edge of the trees, movement, a figure, tall, hooded, standing still, watching. Ethan grabbed the flashlight and flicked it on. Nothing. No figure, no sound. Just the wind rattling the pine branches. He turned back. Bravo hadn't moved. His eyes were locked on the same spot. Ethan's voice was low. "Who the hell did we wake up, Bravo?" No answer. Only silence. But it was no longer the peaceful kind. This time, it felt like a countdown had started. The shed behind the cabin leaned like an old man caught in mid-stumble. Its roof sagged under the weight of years and snow. Rust had eaten through the hinges of the door, and a single pine branch had punched clean through one corner. It didn't look like much, but Bravo wouldn't stop circling it. It had started just after sunrise. Ethan had stepped outside with a mug of lukewarm coffee, trying to shake off the images from the night before. The silent figure in the woods, Bravo's low, unshakable growl. Whatever had been out there was gone now, but the air still felt tight, like something was watching from the trees. That's when Bravo made his move. The shepherd had walked straight past the front porch and stopped beside the shed. He sniffed along the wall, tail stiff, body taut. Then he pawed once, lightly, at the rotting wood near the back corner. Then again, harder. Ethan set his coffee down. "You want me to look in there?" he asked, not expecting a response. But Bravo looked back at him, dead in the eye, then turned to face the wall again. That was enough. Ethan grabbed his crowbar and headed for the shed. The door groaned open with a scream that echoed through the pines. Dust spilled out into the light, thick and choking. Inside, it was chaos. Collapsed shelves, rusted tools, a coiled snake of copper wiring tangled with rotting rope, and what looked like a squirrel's abandoned nest. Ethan stepped inside, boots crunching on broken glass. Bravo stayed at the threshold, tail low, ears up. "Smells like something died in here," Ethan muttered. Bravo let out a quiet bark. Ethan turned toward the back wall and noticed something strange. The wood paneling sounded different underfoot. Hollow. He stepped again. Slower. Same sound. He crouched, brushed aside old leaves, and tapped along the boards. There. One board moved slightly under pressure. Ethan worked his crowbar into the seam and pried. The plank came up clean, revealing a narrow rectangle cut into the floor, almost like a trap door. But this one was different. Reinforced. Steel-lined edges. Bolted shut. Ethan stared at it for a long second. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered. Bravo sat beside him now, eyes fixed on the panel, breathing steady. Ethan knelt, unscrewed the bolts one by one, and lifted. Beneath the trapdoor, a wooden staircase descending into darkness. The air that rushed up was cold, mechanical, tinted with oil and ozone. Ethan clicked on his flashlight. "You ready?" he asked. Bravo moved first. They descended together, step by careful step, the light from above shrinking behind them. The walls narrowed, lined with dense concrete and thin wiring. At the bottom, the narrow stairwell opened into something much bigger. A basement. No, a lab. The flashlight beam caught rows of shelves, metallic equipment coated in light dust, and large machines tucked into corners. Some of them hummed softly. Still alive, still running. Ethan's breath caught. It was like stepping back in time. On the left wall, file cabinets stacked 3 rows high. On the right, glass boards covered in mathematical scrawl, diagrams of magnetic fields, resonance charts, power flow maps. In the far corner, a table with a thick ring of coils and a copper core at its center pulsed faintly with blue light. Bravo walked ahead now, sniffing. No hesitation. He moved like he belonged there. Ethan stepped up to the desk in the center of the room and froze. A coffee mug sat there. White, chipped, still stained. The ring of dried coffee hadn't collected dust. Someone had been here recently. Ethan scanned the room with the flashlight again, more urgent this time. Nobody. But the place didn't feel empty. It felt paused, like whoever had been working here had just stepped out to grab something from upstairs. He looked back at the mug, then down at the stack of papers underneath it. Engineering logs, test results, dated. Some of them were recent, within the last month. He pulled a binder from the edge of the desk and flipped it open. Title page: Energy Field Stabilization, Phase 3. Author, Dr. Russell Blake. Ethan sat hard on the stool beside the desk. "What the hell is this?" He flipped through pages of notes. Schematics. Field tests, some of them marked with alarming observations. Field output test number 17. Grid destabilization confirmed. Output too high for regional tie-in. Risk of power failure cascade. Security note: keep prototypes offline unless under lab supervision. Then a red marker scribbled across the margin. They'll come for it again. If they find me, burn everything. Unless you're the right one. Ethan felt the words punch straight through him. Whoever Blake had been running from, they might still be coming. He turned to Bravo. "You were right to bring me here." Bravo wagged his tail once but didn't relax. Ethan looked around again. The equipment, the coils, the control panels. This wasn't some prepper's bunker. It was a fully operational lab from the Cold War, and somehow it had kept running. He spotted a control panel on the wall. Buttons were lit green. The main circuit was live. But what really made his heart lurch was the small display on the corner of the terminal. An alert screen, still blinking. Visitor alert. Perimeter breach, 3:12 a.m. Motion detected, south tree line. Camera offline. The exact time Bravo had barked 2 nights ago. Ethan felt the chill all over again. They weren't just being watched. Someone had already been close, and now they'd know someone was in the lab. Bravo shifted, eyes narrowing. Ethan closed the binder, grabbed the most recent files, and stuffed them into his jacket. He couldn't take everything, not yet. But he couldn't leave this down here unprotected either. They climbed back up the stairs. Ethan bolted the trapdoor shut and covered it again with the loose boards and rotting tarp. He turned to Bravo, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "You found this for a reason." And I don't think it was just luck. Bravo pressed his head into Ethan's chest. Not a nuzzle, a lean, like a soldier checking his teammate's pulse. And Ethan, for the first time in years, felt like he was needed again. Not just alive, not just surviving, but chosen. They headed back toward the cabin with the frost crunching underfoot, the sunrise barely warming the trees. Something dangerous had just begun. The wind came in stiff off the ridge that morning, scattering pine needles across the porch like warnings. Ethan opened the cabin door with sleep still in his bones and nearly stepped on it. A letter, thick cream-colored envelope. No stamp, no markings except for his name, written in steady cursive, Ethan Cole. His breath caught. He scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. He crouched, picked it up and turned it over. The flap was tucked, not sealed. No wax, no tape. Inside, a single folded sheet of paper. "Meet me at the North Ridge." Sundown. Arbe. The initials hit him like a fist. Russell Blake. Ethan read the message again, slower this time. It was written in the same penmanship as the journals. Same loops, same pressure. But the ink was fresh. That letter hadn't been sitting out long. He looked down at Bravo, who was already standing at his side, ears up, eyes locked on the forest like he expected someone to appear any second. Ethan folded the note and slipped it into his jacket. "You were right. He's still out there." He didn't ask the question aloud, but it hung in the air anyway. What kind of man leaves behind a secret lab, decades-old technology, and then shows up again like he never left? By 4 p.m., Ethan had checked his shotgun twice, loaded his flashlight with fresh batteries, and packed a small first aid kit in the side pocket of his coat. The sun had already started its drop toward the horizon. Bravo paced near the porch steps, tail straight, eyes never leaving the trail that led north. Ethan finally exhaled. "Let's go." They walked in silence, boots crunching on the hard frost, breath fogging in the cooling air. The North Ridge wasn't far, maybe a mile through forested hills, but it felt like stepping into a place between worlds. The deeper they went, the more the trees closed in. Sunlight slipped away behind branches. Shadows stretched long and thin. Bravo walked ahead, confident but alert. Every few paces he'd stop, sniff the air, glance back as if to say, "Still with me." At the top of the ridge, the trees opened into a clearing lined with stones like old teeth. A faint line of smoke curled above the treetops at the far edge, not from a chimney. Something smaller. Controlled. Ethan raised his flashlight but didn't switch it on. He stepped cautiously into the open. And then he saw him. A man stood near the fire, tall and gaunt, wrapped in a coat the color of damp ash. His hair was silver and long enough to curl at the ends. His posture, though straight, had a weight to it. A body that had carried something too heavy for too long. He didn't flinch when Ethan appeared. "You came," the man said simply. His voice was calm, dry like old paper, with a trace of something educated, distant, and long buried. Ethan stopped 20 feet away. "You're Russell Blake?" The man nodded. "I was." Bravo didn't bark. He moved forward slowly, ears forward, tail neutral. He stopped a few steps from the man and sat, watching, studying. Blake looked down at the dog, then back at Ethan. "He trusts well. Selectively. It's how I knew you were the right one." Ethan's throat tightened. "You've been watching us." "Not always closely. But I've never been far." Blake gestured to a fallen log. "You'll want to sit." "This won't be short." Ethan hesitated, then moved forward, one step at a time. He sat, his hands resting on his knees, the flashlight still clutched but off. Blake crouched by the fire and stirred it with a stick. I built that cabin in 1961. I thought I could work in peace. I was wrong. Ethan watched the flames flicker. They came for it. Blake continued. Not just the government. Private contractors, energy companies, people who smile while they dismantle the world. You disappeared, Ethan said. I had to. They wouldn't stop, so I took the only thing that mattered and ran. He looked at Ethan, eyes sharp despite the years. And now I'm old. Too old to keep it safe, but you carry the right kind of damage. Ethan narrowed his eyes. What the hell does that mean? Blake smiled faintly. It means loss doesn't scare you. Greed doesn't own you. And your dog. He looked at Bravo again. He wouldn't have led you to the lab if you weren't worth the trust. Ethan looked at the fire, jaw clenched. I don't want any part of a war, neither did I. Blake said quietly. But when someone builds something that could change the world, war comes looking. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded set of papers. He handed them to Ethan. Bank statements, account numbers, trust fund documentation, signatures. Ethan's name typed neatly near the bottom. You're giving me this? Ethan asked. The lab, the tech, all of it? Not giving, Blake corrected. Entrusting. There's a difference. Ethan flipped through the documents. One number caught his eye. $5 million. In these accounts. Enough to continue the work, expand, protect it. And in return? Ethan asked. You keep it out of their hands. You don't sell, you don't bargain, you protect it. And when the time comes, you pass it on to someone like you. Someone Bravo would follow. Ethan looked at the dog. Bravo was still, watching, guarding. Blake stood slowly, wincing at the motion. This isn't about money. It's about legacy, about keeping power in the hands of someone who understands its cost. Ethan didn't answer right away. The trees whispered behind them. The fire cracked once, sharp in the silence. Finally, he said, Why not just destroy it? Blake looked into the flames. Because it works. And someday the world might be desperate enough to use it right. But until then, someone has to make sure it's not used wrong. Ethan looked down at the paperwork again. Then at Blake. I don't know if I'm that guy. Blake's eyes didn't waver. You are. Because you didn't come here looking for anything, and because your dog already decided you are. Ethan glanced at Bravo again. The dog stood, walked to his side, and sat, his body pressed against Ethan's leg. Blake stepped back toward the tree line, fading into shadow. I'll be nearby a little longer, he said. But from here on out, it's yours. He vanished into the woods like he'd never been there at all. Ethan looked down at Bravo, heart pounding, papers shaking slightly in his hand. Guess we've got work to do, he said. Bravo looked up, eyes calm and steady. And Ethan knew. The fight had found them, and there was no walking away now. The cabin came alive again, one circuit at a time. Ethan stood outside on the frost-bitten porch, watching the solar array blink green for the first time in decades. The panels were old. Some Blake had salvaged from surplus auctions years ago, but they still worked. And under Bravo's watchful eye, every cable laid and every junction box tested felt like a stitch back into the skin of something bigger than both of them. Inside, the hum of restored electricity filled the air like a quiet promise. Ethan looked down at Bravo, who sat beside him in the snow, nose twitching towards the woods. You trust this, don't you? Ethan said. Bravo didn't move, but his stillness was an answer. Alert, composed, like he knew this was just the beginning. By the end of the week, Blake had returned, quiet as ever, but with an armful of schematics and a new name. Casey Lynn, he said. She's young, but she's a genius. just finished her postgrad at MIT before she vanished off their radar. She's been waiting for something that matters. When she arrived, she was smaller than Ethan expected. Early 30s, sharp-eyed, dressed like someone who'd lived too long in rooms full of whiteboards and fluorescent lights. Her first words weren't a greeting. "Where's the system you stabilized?" Ethan blinked. "Hello to you, too." But Bravo walked right up to her, gave a single bark, then turned and trotted into the lab. She followed without hesitation. They were a strange team. Ethan, the war-scarred ex-infantryman, Casey, the brilliant recluse, and Bravo, the dog that had seen too much but never turned away. The first few weeks they barely spoke outside of the work. But once the prototypes started producing power, and once the grid in the nearby town of Delaney flickered back to life after a 20-minute test run, something shifted. Bravo started getting visitors. It began with kids. They'd bike up the gravel trail and sit near the cabin fence, hoping to catch a glimpse of the dog everyone was talking about. "I heard he found a man who was dead in the woods for 7 years. One whispered. "He can smell electricity," said another, wide-eyed. One day, an older man limped up the hill using a cane made of twisted wood. "You the one with the German Shepherd?" he asked Ethan. "I am." The man nodded toward Bravo, who sat under the porch's edge watching the visitor. "My generator went out last week. Didn't have the cash to fix it. Next thing I know, one of your rigs pulls up. Young woman hops out. Says Bravo picked me off a list. Says power's on the house." Ethan looked at Casey, who shrugged. "Dogs know who needs help," she said. Words spread like fire in dry brush, but so did interest. Unwanted interest. One morning, a drone buzzed past the cabin, too low and too quiet to be from the local kids. Casey spotted the lens just before it zipped back toward the ridge. "That's a military-grade lens," she said. "They're watching us." Bravo had already taken off into the woods, tracking its path. He came back with a piece of casing in his jaws, black carbon fiber, still warm. Ethan turned it over and saw the emblem burned into the side. A small private security firm out of DC-1 he remembered from deployments. "They're not just watching," he said. "They're preparing." They doubled security. Cameras, motion sensors. Casey encrypted their network with something that would make the NSA sweat. Blake showed up again that night, paler than usual. "They're getting desperate," he warned. "The moment this project hits public attention, they'll move in hard." "Not to study." To erase, Ethan clenched his fists. "Then we stay one step ahead." Blake nodded, but his eyes were tired. "They won't go after you directly. They'll go after the work. Your people. The ones you've helped. The next day, they found Casey's test station in Delaney burned to the ground. Arson. No prints, no security footage. Just ash and the melted wreck of a prototype worth nearly $250,000. Ethan crouched beside the rubble, hand resting gently on Bravo's back. "This isn't a warning," he said. "No," Casey replied. "This is their first move." Back at the cabin, Ethan gathered the team. "From now on, we don't just rebuild. We protect. Every install comes with a copy hidden in a second location. Every blueprint goes offline, and if anything happens to us, Bravo knows where it all is." Casey raised an eyebrow. "The dog's our backup plan." Bravo thumped his tail once. Ethan smiled faintly. "He's more reliable than most people." By spring, the tech was spreading, quietly, under the radar. The lights in 5 towns flickered to life with systems no one could trace. Journalists sniffed, but couldn't confirm. Locals talked, but only in whispers. And at the center of it all was Bravo. He didn't just guard the cabin. He chose who to trust. He patrolled the hills at night, picked up scents no human could read, and more than once chased away intruders before they got within 100 yards. One morning, Ethan found a message carved into a birch tree just outside the perimeter. "We see you." He stared at it for a long time. Bravo came up beside him and pressed his head against Ethan's hip. "You're not alone," Ethan whispered. And he wasn't. Not anymore. The man stepped out of the black Escalade like he owned the land beneath his shoes. His coat was too clean for these mountains, tailored to a boardroom, not a backwoods cabin. Ethan clocked the gleaming watch, the polished boots, and the way he never looked at Bravo. "Mr. Monroe," the man said, offering a hand he didn't expect to be shaken. "I'm Miles Vexler. I represent Halbert Energy. We've been following your progress." Ethan didn't move. "That's supposed to flatter me?" Vexler smiled like it was rehearsed. "Let's skip the posturing. We're prepared to offer $12 million. Today, full buyout. You, the girl, the old man, you walk away with more money than you'll ever spend. And we'll take it from here. Take what? Hope. Infrastructure. The future. Call it what you want." Bravo growled low, stepping forward. Vexler didn't flinch, but he finally acknowledged the dog. "I heard the stories," he said. "Good nose. Loyal. But even the best dogs eventually get put down when they bite the wrong hand." Ethan's voice was calm, but steel threaded every syllable. "Leave." Now Vexler's smile vanished. "You think you're the first?" Blake said the same thing 20 years ago. Look where it got him, that night. The wind turned sharp. Bravo paced the perimeter until past midnight, ears flicking to every crunch of snow in the forest. Inside, Casey was asleep at the console, and Blake was reading by the dim blue glow of an old CRT monitor. Ethan stayed in the hallway, boots on, rifle nearby. They heard the glass before they heard the shout, a crash from the lab. Then another. Then a sharp, guttural bark, cut short. Ethan ran. The door was splintered, hinges torn. Inside, sparks flew from ripped cables. One of the generators had been gutted, wires yanked like veins torn from flesh. Chemical canisters were overturned, their acrid scent burning Ethan's nose. And in the corner, Bravo lay on his side, breathing shallow, fur matted with blood. "No, no, no," Ethan whispered, dropping to his knees. Bravo's eyes flicked open. He tried to stand, legs shaking, but collapsed again. Ethan's hands trembled as he felt along the ribs. Shallow puncture, deep gash near the shoulder, blunt trauma to the hip. "He fought," Blake said from the doorway, pale as paper. "He fought them." Ethan's voice cracked. "They came for the tech." "No," Blake said. "They came for him. They want to break us." Ethan carried Bravo to the makeshift medical bench. Casey rushed in behind him, already pulling on gloves, clearing space. "Get alcohol." "Suture kit. I'll need pressure wraps." The minutes bled by like hours. Casey stitched with practiced hands. Blake monitored vitals. Ethan stood silent, hand resting on Bravo's paw, whispering, "Stay. Just stay outside." The snow turned to sleet. By dawn, the worst was over. Bravo slept under a thermal blanket, heart steady but weak. "They meant to kill him," Casey said. "They didn't care if we were watching." This was a message. Ethan nodded. "I got the message." Later that morning, a package arrived at the end of the drive. No return address, just a flat box wrapped in waterproof black. Inside, a single photo. Bravo, lying in the snow, bleeding. Taken through a rifle scope. On the back, one line handwritten in red ink. "Next time we don't miss." Ethan stood there for a long time. He didn't tell Casey, didn't tell Blake. He just took the photo, lit a match, and watched it curl to ash. Then he walked back inside, sat by Bravo and whispered, "You're still here." So are we, because he knew now. This wasn't about money, or energy, or even secrets. It was about whether people like Vexler could break something that chose to fight back. And Ethan. He was done playing defense. So was Bravo. The first snow had hardened to ice, covering the cabin and surrounding woods in a frozen silence. Inside the lab, the hum of electricity had shifted. Less lab, more war room. Ethan stood over a hand-drawn map spread across the metal work table. Every tree, ditch, and ridge around the property was marked. Camo netting had been stretched across the roof. The windows were reinforced with leftover rebar and old steel paneling from the storm shelter. Everything that could be turned into a deterrent was. Blake stood to the side, his face more hollow than usual. "They'll come again," he said. Ethan nodded, rolling up his sleeves. "Let them." Bravo lay nearby, the gash on his shoulder now stitched, the limp mostly gone. He had taken to sleeping near the front door, nose always pointed toward the woods. But now his eyes were wide open, locked on Ethan, waiting. Casey burst in with a flash drive clenched between two fingers. "It's ready," she said, breathless. "The fail-safe protocol. If they breach the lab, it'll trigger a shutdown and fry everything. We'll lose the data, but they won't get it either." Ethan took the drive, looked at her. "We won't need it." She didn't argue, but the weight in her eyes said she had prepared for the worst. That night, Bravo wouldn't sleep. He paced the porch, ears up, breath fogging in the cold air. Around 2:17 a.m., he froze mid-step and let out one low, guttural bark. Ethan grabbed the rifle. Outside, headlights cut through the trees. No pretense, no stealth. Just a blacked-out van and two smaller SUVs barreling down the icy trail. "They're not hiding anymore," Blake muttered. Ethan looked at Bravo. "You ready?" Bravo's ears twitched once, then he sprinted off the porch, disappearing into the woods. Ethan didn't follow. He knew the plan. Casey stayed at the console, ready to pull the plug. Blake grabbed a radio and slipped to the roof. Ethan moved through the back door, rifle slung low, steps silent on the snow. From the woods came rustling. Then silence. Then chaos. A flash of fur. Bravo burst from the tree line, snarling, circling the men as they fanned out. He darted between them, barking sharp commands Ethan had trained years ago. Left, right, split! The intruders were disoriented, spinning to track him. They didn't see the tripwires. The first explosion was just noise, an old bear banger rigged with fish line. The next was shrapnel, a blast of nails and powder from a converted pipe jammed between tree roots. Men scattered. One dropped his rifle. Another screamed as a net, laced with barbed wire, snapped around his legs. Ethan emerged from the trees and fired into the air. Once. Just once. The mercenaries froze. The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was calculation. But then Bravo moved again, this time slower, more deliberate. He herded the remaining men toward the ice pond at the north edge of the property. There, beneath the snow, Casey had wired a ring of low-voltage shock pads Ethan had salvaged from old fencing. One man stepped forward and collapsed, twitching. Another tried to run, only to trip the line that slammed a steel gate shut behind him. Within 3 minutes, it was over. 5 men. 4 restrained. 1 unconscious. No fatalities, but no doubt who was in control. Bravo returned to Ethan's side, breath visible. Fur singed, but his eyes alive. Casey opened the front door and stared out at the wreckage. "You didn't kill them," she said. Ethan looked down at Bravo. "No, but they'll remember this more than a bullet." Inside the lab, Blake activated a new firewall. Casey's failsafe stayed unplugged. The data lived. So did the mission. That night they sat by the wood stove, the lab dimmed to a quiet hum once again. Bravo curled up at Ethan's feet, chest rising steady. "He's more than a dog," Casey said, voice soft. Ethan didn't answer right away. Then, "He's a Marine." And outside, under the moonlight, a black van still smoldered in the snow. The sun rose slow and gold over the ridge, casting soft light on the cabin that had once been barely more than a shell. Now it stood proudly as the Blake Energy Project, a solar geothermal hybrid lab nestled deep in the northern Montana. No more rust on the roof, no more broken windows, just clean lines, humming panels, and hope. The old flag waved at half-staff, not out of mourning, but memory, for what was lost and what had been built in its place. People came in trucks and boots and borrowed vans from towns scattered miles apart. They'd heard of this place, of the energy lines running to clinics where diesel generators once failed, of houses lit at night where candles used to flicker against thin walls, and of the dog. Bravo stood beside Ethan as the first group of kids arrived. They didn't hesitate. They ran to him like he was a celebrity, which by now he was. They knew the story, not the full military record, not the classified ops. Just that when men with guns tried to shut this place down, Bravo didn't back away, that he led the defense, that he got hurt, and came back. One little girl knelt beside him, stroking the fur along his back where a scar still ran beneath. She whispered, "You saved the lights in my school." Bravo didn't move, just let her stay there, her small hand on his ribs. Ethan adjusted the collar of his shirt, the fabric crisp but unfamiliar. Around his neck hung Sarah's wedding ring on a thin leather cord. He touched it absently as he scanned the crowd. Casey stood near the new wind inverter, already explaining the build to a group of high schoolers. Blake sat in a rocking chair on the porch, Kane resting beside him, eyes glassy but alert. The years had caught up. His hands shook now, and his speech slurred some days, but his gaze stayed locked on the flag. And Bravo. "Place looks good," he rasped. Ethan smiled. "It should. Your name's on it?" Blake chuckled. "That don't mean anything unless it works." "Oh, it works," Casey said, walking up behind them. 15 communities lit up, 2 mobile medical units, a reservation in Montana wants in next month. The list's growing. A slow nod. "Good." Bravo shifted beside Ethan, ears twitching toward the speakers being set up for the ceremony. A microphone whined once. The crowd hushed. Ethan stepped to the makeshift stage, just 2 pallets stacked and covered in plywood. He didn't hold notes, just his hand on the chain around his neck. "When we started this," he said, voice calm but firm, "we didn't have backing. We didn't have a blueprint. We didn't even have a full roof." Laughter rippled gently through the crowd. "But we had 3 things," he continued. "A broken promise, a second chance, and a dog who refused to let us quit." He turned toward Bravo, who remained seated, alert and unmoving, watching Ethan the way only a war dog watches his partner. Fully present, listening. "Some of you already know this," Ethan said, "but 6 months ago, someone tried to shut this down, tried to take it with force." A few nods, murmurs. They failed. Because Bravo didn't run. He stood between us and the dark, a beat of silence. He's not just a military dog. He's not just retired. He's a sentinel, a reminder that loyalty doesn't fade. It waits, it watches, and when needed, it moves. More than one person wiped a tear. Blake's chin dropped, and his fingers tapped once on the cane. Ethan stepped back and sat near Bravo, resting a hand lightly on the dog's neck. The cameras were rolling, the live stream blinking green in the corner. He looked into the lens. There's a lot of noise in the world right now. A lot of people chasing money, power, control. But in all of that, sometimes there's just one animal, one heartbeat, that says, "I'm not leaving." Bravo didn't flinch, didn't look away. Ethan's voice lowered. "What about you?" he asked, soft but clear. "Has a loyal dog ever stood by you, even when no one else did?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with something steady, something that hummed just beneath the surface of memory. The screen faded to black. Then a line of white text appeared. For Bravo, for every dog who stayed. And beneath it, a quiet call to action. If a dog has ever stood by you, share this story. And support those who guard us in silence. Subscribe to the German Shepherd channel. Honor the ones who never walked away.